Welcome to Universal Man, where we turn your flight into fight so that you can master yourself and conquer your goals. My name is Mark Weppet, and I'm here to help you sharpen your masculine edge. And in today's video, I'm going to be returning to the masculine archetypes. But this time, I'm going to be trying to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be breaking away from the traditional masculine archetypes, and I want to be looking at kind of two that are more synthetic. They're combinations of other archetypes. And we have the priest and the jester. And I think these are particularly powerful and pertinent archetypes to look at in today's culture. On one hand, you've got the priest, who is full of, meaning and power and gravitas, but he can get kind of stodgy and overbearing and dogmatic. But on the other side, we've got the jester, and the jester can be very, fun and sensual and kind of like lighthearted and poke fun at a lot of people. But he can also ultimately end up being kind of nihilistic and hedonistic. And so there's a certain kind of balance that needs to be struck between these if you want to reach your maximum potential. But more than that, understanding these two archetypes can also help you really understand the world. So let's get into it. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do a little I guess you could call it a little recap of the past couple of archetypes. I did a full series on all these things a while ago. And, we covered the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. These are the traditional ones, at least according to, the popular study of masculinity today. Okay. And so the king, I see him up at the top. And the king is kind of the ordering archetype that orders all of these other three. And the king is kind of responsible for growth. He wants to order everything, order and growth. That's what he does. Just like a real king, they're responsible for order and growth. So is the king archetype, okay? And on the other side, you've got the lover. And the lover is all about passion. He's about the feeling. He's about the emotive aspect of masculinity. And in a way, both of these are kind of end game desires. Like the king, he wants a higher desire or a higher order, a higher meaning, and the lover is more concerned with an immediate desire. He's concerned with immediate experience, okay? And then the warrior and the magician, they represent the means to achieve that end. Okay, so the warrior is the more aggressive, combative, sort of disciplined person. This is the magician's the more the inventive, kind of intellectual, discovering sort of side. And they're just, one's kind of harsher, more action-oriented and aggressive. The other one's more intellectual and theoretical and that sort of thing. But together, these are more or less the basic masculine archetypes. Okay, now, if we combine these, it looks like we've got kind of two poles. And this is where I think something that I haven't seen really talked about before. And technically what I'm going to be talking to you guys about today, these are my own thoughts. This is not the standard science of the archetypes. So if I say something that disagrees with someone else, well, that's okay. This is my personal understanding of it at the moment, and probably could be refined. But hey, that's why I'm talking to you guys about it, so I can get some feedback. But basically, the way I see it is that you can combine these two halves of this cross here, and you get the priest and the jester, okay? The priest, then, he has a warrior, a kingly, and a magician aspect to him. And the jester, he's got the warrior, the lover, and the magician aspect. And so this shows up differently on each side. So let's start by looking at the priest, okay? So the warrior aspect of the priest, you can think of that as a combat between good and evil, okay? That's what he's fighting, okay? And his understanding is the understanding of ritual, of history, of the esoteric knowledge of things, okay? And that would be the warrior and the magician aspects. And ultimately, when he puts in that king energy, his goal is to unite people with something higher, to unite people with God. That's been the traditional role of the priest in society, is that he unites people with God. And on the other side, we've got the jester, okay? And he's got a warrior, lover, and magician aspect. So his warrior aspect is kind of the war of wits. All right, he wants to win the it's not just wits, because it's like the rational kind of argument. He likes that, but he also likes to, he doesn't necessarily play fair. He doesn't necessarily stick to the rules of debate. He'll throw in jokes and underhanded kind of stuff like that. He'll make the audience laugh and win them over, even if he can't win it with rationale alone. But he wants to win essentially the love of the people around him. And he can use all different kinds of deception and persuasion, and he'll use art and beauty and that sort of things to win people over. And ultimately, the Jester, he wants to unite people with that immediate experience. That's what the lover aspect is kind of concerned with here. And so we've got the Jester lacking the king element, and then the priest lacking the lover element. And so you can see how this creates sort of a dichotomy. And it's important to understand how these these different pieces show up in the world. So let's start talking about these things in a little more detail, about the priest and the Jester. We'll start with the priest here, okay? Now, first we'll look at what too much priest energy looks like, then too little priest energy, and then we'll talk about what a healthy amount would be, or the healthy balance would look like, okay? So too much priestly energy turns you into a zealot, okay? And a zealot's kind of an ideological zombie. They basically are someone who has become a robot for their cause. And you can tell if you fall into this path if you can't converse with anyone who disagrees with you. You either need to convert them or you just completely reject them. And this is the ideological zealot, okay? And in some ways, it's kind of like the zealot becomes either too hot or too cold. Like someone who becomes too cold, I would think of that kind of as a Sam Harris, Eckhart Tolle, or like a monk-like character who has, cut off their humanity. Like people like Sam Harris and Eckhart Tolle, they're very interesting people. They have a lot of really interesting and cool stuff to say, and I might even agree with a lot of it, but their entire mannerism is just so robotic, so cold, so like they've, through asceticism or whatever it is they've done, they've somehow dismantled that the emotive aspect of their being. And when you get too much down that route, you kind of turn people off to you, because it's like, hey, maybe what you're saying is right, but I don't want to agree with it, because if I get too much of what you got, I'm going to turn into you, and you're not necessarily putting off an energy I really dig. At least that's my opinion. And then on the other side, sometimes people, the zealots, they get a little too hot. And this would be kind of the social justice warriors. I think they're a good example right now. They're the people who are super fired up for their cause, and they're willing to fight for it, and the attraction's outrage. And, you got it on both sides. And I've talked about the cult of outrage. A lot of that is run by these zealots who rile everybody up, and there's a lot of energy there, so it's kind of attractive, but, it's not necessarily healthy or balanced energy. So that's kind of the extreme end of the priest, too much priest energy, okay? On the other side, you have kind of what I would call the heathen, all right? This is the person who's basically just uncultured and unsophisticated. They don't really have any convictions. Because they haven't really thought about it. They don't have any sophistication in their beliefs or their ideals. They just kind of float through life without any higher order or meaning or purpose or value. And they kind of just take this sort of path of least resistance. And it's a sort of wishy-washy place. And it's very difficult to arrive at any real sense of meaning or satisfaction without some kind of higher principle guiding you and ordering your life. So, that's obviously not good either. Now, what does healthy priest energy look like? Well, I think healthy priest energy is when you've got, a balance of both those things. You've got a clear perspective of the things that matter to you. You've set these orders and virtues and values in their proper place. And because of that, you have a map to navigate reality. All right. And, for me, I follow the value system of, Catholicism, Western Christianity. And that gives me a very clear value system. It's one that I've looked at many other different value systems. I think this one offers the best fit for me and for my interaction with the modern world. And it doesn't need to be that way for you, but you need something. You need something that pulls you, that gives you some sort of map for how to orient yourself in reality. Otherwise, you just get lost. So people who are healthy examples of this, people who are kind of high profile successes of priestly energy. I would think Martin Luther King Jr. He was an excellent example of it, of a guy who had a very high vision of what he wanted to accomplish. I think a more contemporary example would be Dr. Jordan Peterson. I think he is constantly bringing people to these higher realizations, asking people to look at bigger things and take more responsibility for their life. And a lot of people are loving him for it, and that's why he's blowing up. So now let's go and look at the Jester. All right. And we'll do the same thing. We'll look at too much, too little, and then just right. Okay. So when you got too much Jester energy, you essentially become a scoundrel. Okay. You become a rogue. You become this person who is a mischievous troublemaker, not really to anyone's benefit. Like the scoundrel is the person who only and always ever plays devil's advocate. Everybody knows this guy. It's like you're trying to have like a real discussion about something, and he's the guy who just sits in the corner, either cracking jokes or challenging everything you say without actually putting forth a position of his own. And he just wants to tear things down because he doesn't have anything, and so he just wants to tear everyone else down. This is also the guy who, gets upset when you become successful. He tries to belittle it. He tries to minimize your accomplishments. So it's like this Jester energy. It's kind of deconstructive energy. Or destructive energy. It's about tearing things down, where the priest is about building up towards something. And so this can be really a toxic sort of thing, because when you tear everything down, when you're constantly breaking things apart, you're poking holes in every little bit of meaning, saying, oh, it doesn't matter, all your emotions don't matter, they're just neurochemical impulses. You're constantly breaking things into smaller and smaller bits. You ultimately end up at nihilism. You end up where nothing means anything. And what that leaves you with is basically just the pursuit of your immediate pleasures, because why not, right? If nothing means anything, then why not just, drink yourself into oblivion or whatever. So that's kind of the pitfall of, I would say, the Jester, is that if taken to the extreme, pokes fun at everything, and then nothing becomes serious and nothing matters. So that's too much. Too little Jester energy is the prude. It's basically someone who takes everything too seriously. They can't make a joke or take one, and they suck all the fun and passion out of an event, and they're offended all the time. And everybody knows prudes, okay? No one likes a prude. And people, they become prudes because they're so insecure in their own beliefs and values that they need to get offended and protect them at all times. And if anyone challenges them, their whole world crumbles because they haven't maybe really thought about what they believe. They just kind of latched onto it because it provides them with a sense of security. And that's, that doesn't make for a very resilient mindset, because that's the thing. Like when you have your Jester energy in proper proportions, it makes you tremendously resilient because it allows you to respond to the tragedy and hardship of life with some resiliency, with the ability to laugh at things, to be able to find joy in the tragedy. Sometimes things are so crazy. It's like either you laugh about it or you cry about it. Okay. And, sometimes, you're going to cry about it, but if you can never laugh about it, if you can never laugh, especially your own tragedy, your self-induced stuff, like, I'm constantly screwing things up and working against myself. And when I can laugh at myself, it's much easier to then get over myself and improve whatever that thing is, rather than getting so pissed off constantly at my own shortcomings. So the ability to laugh at yourself, it's super essential. And so you can see this balance between this Jester energy and this priest energy. They both are requirements for having a firm and solid footing in this world. One keeps you anchored on things that mean more, and they allow you to turn to higher things when things get tough. And the other allows you to get kind of anchored in the present, be able to laugh about it, be able to, poke fun at the things that need to be poked fun at. And I didn't mention this, but I think that any good comedian or insightful artist is kind of an example of the Jester. They poke fun at the things that need to be made fun of. They provide commentary, on the things that need to be looked at. And that's been the role of artists, comedians, rogue thinkers and stuff for centuries. They're constantly exposing truths that are the things that kind of that'll shape the culture. Everything from, it's like that bard back in the tavern back in the day singing songs about the king, and now we've got like your YouTube artist and whatnot who's critiquing some politician or something like that. It's a very important aspect of our society. Otherwise, things get really crazy. That's why in like in communist countries, they really crack down on this kind of stuff, because that sort of social commentary has a tremendous amount of power. So I would say that at the highest level, kind of the most powerful people often have a very solid balance of these two energies. They have both a fully developed and balanced priest and a fully developed and balanced jester. And you can see this all kind of throughout history, the people with one or the other being able to do a lot of stuff. But then when it all comes together in one package, when you have a charismatic, person who can work a crowd, work a room, but then they also have high ideals, aspirations, and morals, that's the kind of person that changes the landscape of everything. And I think you can kind of see that in some extent with Donald Trump. Believe it or not. Say what you will about him, but he definitely has both of these. I would say a little bit more of the jester than the priest, but he definitely has it. So let me explain. So Donald Trump, he has been attacked more than anyone else I've ever seen. And maybe in the history of the world. To be honest, he might be attacked and maligned in his lifetime more than anyone else ever, just by sheer numbers and eyes on him. And he's got the entire media, the left end of the media, which is most of the media, attacking him constantly. And they're using a pretty powerful and solid jester energy. Half the country is watching, like SNL and all the late night shows, just continuously lambast him. And this is an example, these media, the leftist media, that's an example of what you could call even a balanced representation of both the jester and the priest, because they think, they're poking fun at Donald Trump, jester, but then they're doing it with a higher thing in mind. They believe that he's evil, so we're going to tear him down and we're going to do something good. So that's a potent combination. It's got half the country real riled up. But the other half of the country is kind of behind Donald Trump, and he's doing the same thing, but back at them. He's not crumbling because he also has that combination. He has the snark and the name calling, and the ability to be a showman and crack jokes and change the news cycle with a single tweet. But he also speaks on borderline religious language to a lot of his base. He honors God and country and America first, and American individualism and kind of winning. All the things sacred to Americans. This kind of stuff. And so he on one hand is kind of like a troll, but that would be the jester aspect. But then on the other hand, he's kind of like this messenger from God, which would be the more holy roller, whatever conservative sort of thing. And, despite what you think of him, he's effective because he's working both these aspects. And this is something that you have to understand, is that the person who can manage and implement all the different faculties of his being in a cohesive sort of manner is going to be infinitely more powerful and effective than someone who just knows how to turn up one vector of their personality. And you see this, all the time. Like, a lot of times it's not like the person who's the smartest, the hardest working, the person who is, the most charismatic or whatever. It's the person who's kind of got the best stack of all of these things, who knows how to play the political game well enough, who's smart enough to not make any stupid decisions, who works just hard enough to get the things done he needs to. And being balanced, I think, on the grand scheme of things, pays off way more than being exceptional in any one area. And my concern here with Universal Man is figuring out, all right, how can we turn up all these aspects of our being and then align them ultimately in a, moral and cohesive sort of way? And that's why I like to look at these things. That's why I like these kinds of discussions, because I think that they're very interesting to look at from a personal standpoint. And so, I invite you to look at yourself. In terms of jester and priest, how do you fall? into things? Where do you, what's your balance look like? I've noticed that for me personally, with this project specifically, I've been much more trying to rely on the priest energy. But since I've started doing streams and things like that, I've definitely brought in more of the Jester, more of my, a lighthearted take on things, trying to be a little bit, fun with the thumbnails. And this is something that I want to hopefully develop more, because I think that there's a lot of value in being able to poke fun and able to call out and criticize things that are going on in society in a fun but semi-serious manner. So in yourself, what do you need more? Are you kind of a prude? Are you kind of uptight? Are you way too goofy? Do you take nothing seriously? Because extremes in any direction, you're going to fall into some serious problems. And if you're going to get extreme in any area, you need to be very specific about it. You need to understand the pros and the cons, what that's going to cut you off from, and what that's going to give you access to. We're all going to specialize to some degree in some area or another, but you want to make sure that it's intentional and you fully understand what you're signing up for. So that's all I have for you guys today. Please please subscribe, let me know what you think, and stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.